How about you?
Oh, I'm fine. Keeping busy.
Yeah. Why you are busy. I don't know how you keep it
Oh
up.
my God, our heritage is so intense. My time is not enough. 24 hours are not enough.
Yeah.
100 years are not enough.
Yeah. Boy.
All right. Okay. Welcome to the panel discussion on Vedic chronology for Waves 2020. It is my privilege and honor to have the four people on this panel whom I admire the most. And they know each other, and I've known their work for a long time. And it is only wonderful to have everybody, thanks Corona, virtually. Otherwise, I know Kalyanramanji does not travel much, as does Arun Upadhyaya and I think even Narahari Acharji has some reservations about traveling. So this kind of gives us virtually no chronology, no time needed. And for this, even though we are going to talk about Vedic chronology, but today we have become almost devas, we are just appearing, and we can appear and disappear whenever we want. So I mean, not really that much introduction is needed, but nevertheless, I think just for antiquity, I need to just give a brief introduction to each one of you. And starting with Nilesh Oak, who is otherwise really a business professional, but sometimes it is now coming to fruition that what your real nature is, your real nature is eventually shows up. So even though he has done, it has been in corporate world for a long time, but he finally got to his interest in Indian tradition, culture, and philosophy. And the way he chose is to study more astronomical, chronological determinations of some of the major events that may have happened over a long period of time. And so that's what he now writes, and that's what he speaks about. And he's bringing some very, very new perspective, not just because he's young, but also because he has many things which are, it seems like, some other people ought to know. Then we have Dr. S. Kalyanraman, who I know, I mean, I learned a lot from him since I was at University of Massachusetts, where I started the Indic studies, and a lot of conversation. He actually visited us there and gave one of the Waves conferences, he gave talk, and he has been associated with the Waves. But he also is a person who has made to the calling of his nature. He was also in business. So happens that he was in the Asian Development Bank, and then he left that work and has used his time to do a lot of work. He's director of Saraswati Research Center, where he's a lot of work. He's known for Saraswati River civilization idea, and that eventually he was visionary. He thought about these things ahead of time, but now everybody accepts that there was a Saraswati River. And he has been continuing to that kind of work. So I'm so pleased that I'm able to see him again. And then we have Dr. Narahari Achar, who is a physicist, actually. And in Memphis University, he was a professor of physics. He also took on to this idea of astronomical calculation using planetary software. And he was someone who, for the first time at least, showed that the date is long before what European scholars have suggested, at using computational information and astronomical dating. And that was very helpful to a person like me, who otherwise is interested in the culture and civilization, but not knowing exactly, not being a history student, not knowing that much. So as a scientist, it was so easy for me to connect with his numbers, and I used it all along, all the way until I also learned from Nilesh that there are some other interpretations of it. But both of them are in at least talking about long before than what I think the Western world has acknowledged about Indian civilization. And then finally, I want to introduce Arun Kumar Upadhyaya, whom I have known from his such a beautiful way of interpreting, writing, and quoting. It looks like he was meant to precisely define anything and everything in such a nice and detailed way that you can be only convinced. And he also had his callings. He actually, was a IPS officer, and he started with, I think, physics, and then became IPS officer. Then he still continued with mathematics, which is kind of unusual, highly unusual. And then after his retirement, he has been very, very much involved in writing and presenting the Indian civilization from textual point of view and also from astronomical point of view. So I think each one of you have a great work, experience, enthusiasm, your own calling. And I think all of us are interested in moving this idea forward so that the rest of the world understand. But before that, I think the rest of us understand as to where we are. So with that introduction, brief introduction, I would like to now request Nilesh Ogji to make his presentation first, and then we will follow after him with Kalyanramanji. Nilesh, you can go first.
Namaskar. Now, do you, Balramji, have a specific question that you want me to respond to?
I will have a specific question later. If you want me to ask question, I can start that. But I think I'll let you speak of what you think.
Very good. Okay. So namaskar, everyone. I had a pleasure of meeting in person everyone here on the panel except Arunji. But Arunji, I'm familiar with his work, and I frequently make use of his encyclopedic knowledge. So connected with everyone in some fashion. So I'll give my quick summary. This is a summary of my 30 years of research work. So as Balramji said that I was working in corporate world, but I did not necessarily think of this as a start and a stop, meaning I was working on the subjects of my passion, I would say, the Indian history, for a long time, working in parallel. In fact, my first interview in the corporate world, working for General Electric, and this was at a Toronto International Airport. This is going back 1996. And I was discussing Arundhati Vasishta observation with the person who was asking me questions. And at that time, I did not have an answer. It took me 14 more years. So if I have to quickly summarize my work, it goes something like this. I began with the chronology determination of the Mahabharata, or rather what I would say is I succeeded first in defining the chronology of the Mahabharata. I was working in parallel, especially Ramayana and Mahabharata. And in case of Mahabharata, what I could able to do is I started with one specific observation, astronomy observation from the Mahabharata text. That is the Arundhati Vasishta observation, now very famous, which simply said, Ya Chaisha Visuta Rajas Trailokya Sadhu Sammata Arundhati Tayapesha Vasishta Prushtata Kruta. Now, quick history of this observation. Out of more than 130 plus different Mahabharata researchers who have come up with those many different dates, only four Mahabharata researchers even dare mention it in their research. And what do? The other people simply don't mention it. And this is not some observation that one can easily miss. This comes in the Bhishma Parva, and there are 4 astronomy observations, and every other Mahabharata researcher who refers to astronomy refers the other 3, but not this one. And why that might be the case? Well, it is because it was next to impossible to explain it. It was an enigma. Great Mahabharata researchers like C.V. Vaidya, Bharatacharya C.V. Vaidya, or Bharat Ratna Pava Kane, they simply describe this as simply impossible in the very order of nature, meaning astronomically it's impossible. Long story short, I worked on this for 15 years. Finally, in 2009, I could able to decipher it and decisively show in a very empirical, very objective, testable fashion, in a scientific fashion, there was a specific interval, and only during this interval, anyone watching the sky from India or anywhere in northern hemisphere would have seen Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishta. Now, what was the big deal about it? Big deal was because Vyasa is saying at the time of Mahabharata war, Arundhati is walking ahead. Whereas if you go last 6,500 years, starting with us, going backward, Vasishta is always walking ahead of Arundhati. So after that observation, actually, Professor Achar is one of the Mahabharata researchers I contacted. He actually gave me the contact of P.V. Kane and his book, The History of Dharma Shastra. And I found a lot of useful information from P.V. Kane's book. Then I extracted 300 plus astronomy observations, and think of it like solving a jigsaw puzzle, like a Rubik's Cube, crossword puzzle. And all those observations point me to a point anyone, they will point anyone looking at them to a specific year of the specific year 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharat war. And since then, this is after 2011, I have looked at dozen plus different disciplines of sciences. So oceanography, hydrology, geology, geophysics, geochemistry, seismology, climatology, genetics, physical anthropology, you name it. And if the evidence exists in these fields, it points to again 5561 BCE. Quickly, I did the same thing for Ramayana. Again, I was working in parallel, but it was the Mahabharata that I succeeded in doing it first. Ramayana, in case of Ramayana, I came across close to 600 astronomy observations. And again, when I put them together in a jigsaw puzzle fashion, trying to solve it like a crossword, it points to a very specific year, 12,209 BCE as the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha. And then very relatively recently, 2016, and actually Balramji was kind of, the cause of it, that he said, okay, so you have done this on Ramayana, you have done this on Mahabharata, have you done anything on the Rigveda or Saraswati? And that is when I started looking at Saraswati evidence, especially in the context of Rigveda, because I was familiar with Saraswati evidence from Ramayana and Mahabharata, but not so much from Rigveda, other than works of Sri David Frawley or Sri Kantalagiriji. And again, by luck, I would say Daivam Chaivatra Panchama, I could able to establish somewhat tentative, but still a very solid foundation for the dating of Rigveda. And what I have said based on Sri Kantalagiri's relative chronology, it is that the latest mandalas like Mandala 10 are contemporary with the Mahabharata times, which is 6th millennium BC. And the oldest portion of Rigveda are definitely more than 22,000 BCE or more than 24,000 years. That is my summary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nilesh ji. That was a good way of telling historical things. Like we are talking about chronology, you presented your own chronology of this pursuit. Now I want to go to Dr. Kalyanraman, who has been almost a bhisma of this field. So let him present whatever you want to present. I mean, I know historical thing is very important to you, but nevertheless, since you know everybody's work, please comment on whatever, if you feel appropriate what Nilesh said, or you can talk about your own and what you think the directions would be.
Can I share a screen, PowerPoint slide?
Yes, you can. You can share a screen. You are allowed. Just go to your share screen.
Are you able to see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, the presentation is about the veneration of artisans in the Rigveda. There seems to be an indication based on the contents of the Rigvedic texts and the other Vedic texts that they seem to relate to the transition period from the Neolithic to the Chalcolithic, roughly from 8,500 years ago or approximately 6,500 before Common Era, marked by the development of metallurgy, leading to the running up to the Bronze Age and Iron Age. When arsenical bronze was in short supply, which is a naturally occurring alloy, tin bronze alloy was invented by a brilliant metallurgist who added tin to copper to create tin bronze. I suggest that the Rigveda is dated to the transition period into the Chalcolithic age. Let me take you through some pictures. There is evidence from Nahal Mishmar in Israel, a remarkable arsenical bronze hoard. The dating is still a work in progress, but it seems to be around the 5th millennium BCE. Look at the images. There are hieroglyphs of Karandava, aquatic birds. There are antelopes, and there are mesas, and a variety of shiny metallurgical articles. Amazing stuff. So let's keep this as a background. Now, let me take you on to the textual evidence of the Devi Suktam or the Rashtriya Suktam, Rigveda 10.125. In the second Richa, we hear this. I'll read it out. Aham somam ahanasam viparyaham tvashtaramutta pushanam bhagam. Aham dadani dravinam havishmate suprapye yajamanaya sunvate. The rough translation is, I support, this is by Wilson based on Sayana. I support the four destroying Soma, Tvashta, Pushan, Bhaga. Bhaga is a cognate of Singh Bonga in the Austroasiatic tradition. Bhaga, Bonga. Bestow wealth upon the institutor of the rite or the performance of yajna, offering the oblation, deserving of careful protection, pouring forth the libation. The objective is to create Dadami Dravinam, to create wealth. In this, I want to focus on one particular reference to an artisan called Tvashta. Pushan is the divinity of the pathway. Bhaga is the divinity of the shared wealth. Who is Tvashta? I submit that he is an artisan of the Saraswati Sindhu civilization days. This artisan is venerated in the Rigveda chanting. It could be earlier than the civilization days. Now, who is this Tvashta? This Tvashta is such a remarkable word. It appears in almost all languages of Bharatavarsha. Tvashtra, Tattar, goldsmith. Tattar, alloy of copper and bell metal. Tattati, Tattaran, washerman. Tatte, goldsmith. Tattati, feminine gender of the goldsmith. Tattravadu, Tulu, goldsmith, silversmith. Then in the Indo-Aryan languages, Prakrit, Tattara, Toturu, Tattaro, Tatiyar, Tatera, Tatero, Tatero, Tatera, Tatera. Hindi, which means a brass worker. The essential characteristics of the myth have been theorized as ultimately originated in Proto-Indo-European society around 2000 BCE. For the cognate word of Tuisto or Tuisko, who is supposed to be the father of the Germanic people. We'll come to that. So Tvashtra means carpentry work, formed, fashioned in mind, produced. Tvashtra is a Vishwakarma's son. He is the firstborn, invoked for the offspring. He is the creator of bodies of men and artifacts. He is a Tvashtra. Okay? Now, let us take a look at Tuisto, which I submit is a derivative from Tvashtra. Tuisto. In fact, he is also called Tuisko. Tuisto is derived from Tvashtra. Tuisko is derived from Taksha. Taksha and Tvashtra are synonyms. Tacitus recognizes Tuisto as the father of the Germanic people in Proto-Indo-European times. This is referred to by Jacob Alexander in his famous book, Atman, a reconstruction of the cosmology of the Indo-Europeans. As I mentioned earlier, the essential characteristics of the myth of Tuisto have been theorized, ultimately originated in the Proto-Indo-European society, maybe about 2000 before Common Era. We don't know the date. It's just only a guesswork, according to Simek Rudolph. So as we have seen, the meaning of the Tvashtra is that of a carpenter, a maker of carriages, rathas, former of the bodies of men, animals. So Tvashtra is a very important component of creating a civilizational metaphor for the activities of the artisans, life activities of the seafaring merchants. Is a Taksha, is a Tvashta. In Tamil, it's called Tachan. Taksha is a carpenter. Tarkaran in Pushto language is a carpenter. Takshan, carpenter, Rigveda. Takshanam, Takshanam, Panini. Takhana, Tachan. So all cognate words. So this is a characteristic of the Meluha spoken form of the lingua franca of the civilization, where transformations take place in the pronunciation of words, which Patanjali comments upon in his conversation with the cart driver. And this is a very beautiful commentary. So here are some examples of ancient photographs of carpenters and smiths. Now, the surprise. What is this yajna about? At least in the three ancient documents, Shukla Yajurveda, Maitrayani Samhita, and Kataka Samhita, a remarkable presentation is made of Yajnena Kalpantam, made through Yajna, explained by Shatapada Brahmana and the Sayana's Bhashya. What are they purifying? What are they doing Kalpantam? What are they producing? Ashma, stones, Vritika, clay, Giraya, mountain stones, Parvatas, mountains, Sikatascha, sand, Vanaspatayascha, herbals, Hiranyam, gold, Ayas, alloy metal, Shyamam, some black metal, maybe iron, maybe anything else, Sesam, lead, Trapu. All these are made Yajnena Kalpantam. So what are we getting here? The principal function of the yajna seems to be for the purification of gold, tin, iron ore. So can we reconstruct the chronology of these statements made in these Vedic texts following the Rig Veda and date them in the context of the Chalcolithic or Neolithic transition into the next phase? The Lithic age, the Stone age, gets transformed into Chalcolithic phase of carbon and then goes into the Bronze age. Then there is an overlapping Iron age. So we have archaeological evidences and a number of epigraphs, more than about 9,000 from the Indus corpora, which seem to indicate an incredible amount of metalwork that was done to create the wealth of the nation. So this objective of the Vasodharadi mantra, Vasu is what? Creating wealth. So wealth creation is a very important component of life activity. That is recognized in all the Vedas. So I submit that the Vedic corpus, venerating Twashta, gives us a lead to date at least some of the Samhitas, like Shukla Yajurveda, Vaita and Samhita, Kataka Samhita, and maybe the Rig Veda oral heritage, maybe earlier than these dates, could be 7th millennium or even earlier, we do not know. So it's impossible to find a fixed or exact date. That's my submission. Namaskar.
Thank you, Kalyanramanji. So just to get to people, audience who obviously understand this, you are saying that the Vedic period is at least 5,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago. Is that your submission?
That's right, Balramji. In fact, it could be any time before the 6,000 before Common Era.
Yeah,
because we have archaeological evidence of Bridana and Kunal, where circular pit dwellings existed, which are the Vedic houses, as proven by Louis Renaud. So the Vedic houses archaeologically attest to Bridana to be dated to 7th millennium BC. So if the Vedic time started at that time, and if these explorations of knowledge took place in the Vedic texts as a oral heritage, it will not be unreasonable to date it to 7th millennium BCE, coterminous with the archaeological findings of Mehergarh, where we have got Sirapaldu artifacts of wheels, spoked wheels made. Sarka in Pushto means wheel. Arka means sun's rays. Arka means copper and gold. Arkasal means goldsmith workshop. So the Sarka, the wheel, was a very important component proclaiming their competence in working with metals. So we are definitely getting into the metals age from the Stone Age. When it happened, we do not know.
Thank you so much. I think that's very clear. Wonderful. Of course, this does not go in any way against or contradicts what astronomical things are. So that will be that makes sense. Narahari Acharji has been working on this for a very long time, and so I think I would request him next if he can make his presentation. Can you stop sharing? Kalyanramanji, can you stop sharing?
I stopped. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I would request Narahari Acharji to go next, and if he makes his comments, and then we'll come back to some questions later.
Okay. Thank you, Balramji. Thank you, Kalyanramanji. And thank you, Nilesh. My work goes back to at least 20 years, or probably a little earlier, and it touches upon both of the aspects that Nilesh and Kalyanramanji have touched upon. I started as I'm a physics professor, and I did not know astronomy at all. And then I was asked to teach a course in astronomy for non-science majors. And I had to learn astronomy and teach my students. And that was summer. And so I used to prepare for the next class and go and blur it out. I don't know who had the more difficult time, me or my students. Anyway, I got through that summer. Then I realized that these courses, they teach about astronomy of China, Greece, and Islamic astronomy and so on, but not a word about Indian astronomy. And I looked at 24 texts at that level. Only 2 texts mentioned anything about Indian astronomy, and both were wrong. And one confused Buddha and Buddha, and the other one was Rama was somebody else. And so that was the time I started to looking into Indian texts in astronomy and to learn about it. And one thing led to the another. And at that time, a new software became commercially available. That's the planetarium software. The desktop computers were just becoming powerful enough to run these large programs. And so I got into at that time. So the planetarium software projects the view of the sky anytime, any place in the world. But now there are hundreds of them available, and quite a few of them are free. But anyway, my first attempt was to see whether this could be applied to study the dating of the Indian texts. And the first attempt was made to date the Shatapatha Brahmana, which Dikshit had said to be about 3000 BC, where the Kritikas rise exactly in the east. And I showed that that's quite true. And it's about 2970 or something like that. And then I answered all the objections that had been raised by Pingri and others about accepting that view. And then it was Professor Kalyanraman who suggested that I look into the chronology of Mahabharata. And once I started on that, I got hooked into it. This was a very difficult subject because I did not know much of Sanskrit or the text, and the opinions of most of the scholars were that the astronomical information in Mahabharata were unreliable, inconsistent, and so it's not useful to apply scientific methodology to that. So that was the situation. And then somehow I started on that, and then I thought I would use the references in Udyoga Parva to see if that could be simulated, because the opinion of all the scholars about the references in Bhishma Parva was that is impossible to look at it. So anyway, fortunately, that was a very good choice, because it turns out that using the references in Udyoga Parva, one can actually derive the date of Mahabharata war. And it turns out to be unique date, 3067 BC. The first paper I presented was in a conference on Mahabharata in Montreal. And then there was a conference in Bangalore. And then several places have presented papers and so on. And then that continued. And then there was a lot of difficulty in actually to understand exactly how to interpret the Sanskrit shlokas, to understand the meaning, and to use that to in the astronomical context. Anyway, that confirmed the original work that the 3067 BC refers to the date of the Mahabharata war, and this is also in conformity with the date of the Shatapatha Brahmana, which is about 3000 BC. And then I turned into look into the chronology of Veda, and I started with the work of Tilak, and then looked into that, and have done some work on the structure and chronology of Rig Veda. Rig Veda is a mandala. Mandala is not a book. Mandala refers to something that is circular. And one can see through that my hypothesis in this is that the structure of Rig Veda reflects the performance of Somayaga, the yaga which Dr. Kalyanraman referred to. And then that is actually the basis of the Rig Veda. And in doing so, the Somyaga is a very important ritual, and it is the pressing of the Soma juice, and it is done 3 times a day, in that Pratha Savana, Madhyandina Savana, and Tritiya Savana. And there are specific ritas that are to be recited at these pressings. Now, there is no Somyaga that can be performed without Samaveda. And so there are recitations from Samaveda and from Rig Veda. The recitations from Samaveda are known as Totras, and the recitations from Rig Veda are Shastras. There are 12 Shastras for the Agnishtoma, which is the basic form of Somyaga, and there are 12 Stotras from Samaveda. And the specific requirements of the Ritas shows that actually the first mandala of Rig Veda lays out the foundation for the performance of the Somyaga, and then the other mandalas actually show how to do that. And it turns out that the number of suktas in first mandala is exactly the same as the number of suktas in the 10th mandala, which is 191. And it also shows why that number, how that 191 arises, and why this means the first mandala is the same as the 10th mandala. It's also, this is in Aitreya Brahmana, says that in the Somyaga, the initial Ishti is called the Prayana Ishti, and the concluding Ishti is called Udayana Ishti. And they are to be similar, exactly similar. And if that is so, then it says that it makes the Somyaga like a Shakalas serpent. The tail is the same as the mouth, and so it makes it a circle. And that's exactly the reason Rig Veda is mandala. The first mandala has exactly the same number of suktas as the 10th mandala. So anyway, based on this, then one can look at the astronomical references, and going back to Tilak and looking at the references to Vrishakapi and Rubhus and so on. It turns out that both of them actually refer to the same event, and that turns to be a date of about 7000 BCE. So there is a consistent chronology from about 7000 BCE for Rig Veda. And of course, Rig Veda also contains references to the equinox occurring at different nakshatras, and that can be dated continuously from 7000 to 3000. And so there's a consistent chronology of Rig Veda, Shatapatha Brahmana, Mahabharata, and then one can go on to the other events in the Indian history and so on. So anyway, that's a brief outline of what I have to say.
Unmute myself. So thank you so much. That's a very, very nice narration. Again, we are telling, I'm getting the advantage of listening and learning about your own chronology of how you got into all this, and this is wonderful. As it is true with anything and everything, we are all referring to texts. You're referring to text and how you got some help from Dr. Kalyanraman and others. I think the textual context and the meanings are very important. And so I turn to Arun Kumar Upadhyaya ji, who has, like I said earlier in my introduction, treasure of information, very sharply, very precisely, very applicable, very relevant to things that he can get from various sources. So would like to know, and of course he has been interested in astronomical work. So we'd like to ask him to chime in as to what he thinks of all this chronology, and not only just chronology, but the meanings of these chronological events that may have happened. There are physical meanings and there are metaphysical meanings, and also there are textual references to those in the context that it might have happened. So kindly elaborate on some of those aspects and anything else that you want to do.
Thank you, Professor Balram Singh ji. And it is an honor to talk with scholars like Professor Narahari, Achar, Kalyanraman ji. I have personally met Kalyanraman ji and Professor Balram Singh ji, and
Yes.
it is a pleasure to meet them again through this conference. My work started with astronomy only. In early childhood, at about age of 6, I practiced multiplication and division by preparing horoscopes. So both astronomy and math education started together. My main interest was to calculate the reverse object. First, horoscope is available, then its time of birth I wanted to calculate, but it is too difficult. And after I wrote commentary, about 40 years after that, on Siddhant Darpan, then I started my original target and found the date of birth of Adi Shankaracharya. On the very next day, when I found the birth of Adi Shankaracharya, I saw that one person had obtained the same date, Sripad Kulkarni ji, which I had obtained by astronomical. So I wrote him a letter how you could obtain it without astronomical calculation. So unfortunately, he expired on the very date when my letter reached him. Then his grandson sent me 18 volumes of his work on Indian history. And from that, I learned various aspects of time measures in Indian history or Puranas. So basic idea is that no time measures or units are in direct relation of each other. Like day, var, tithi, nakshatra, yoga, or karan, they don't occur in direct proportion. Like we face problem in tithi calculation. Tithis don't come regularly day after day. So we have to refer to another calendar, which is solar and which is continuous day reckoning. Similarly, for yuga calculation, we are depending on at least 5 samvatsar, pancha samvatsar mayang yugang. That is saying in Vedang Jyotish. Its general common meaning is understood that yuga means 5 years. But real meaning is that 5 types of samvatsar decide a yuga. So what are the yugas in historic reference? Most common yuga is of called Divya Vars, 360 years. Then we have 60-year cycle of joint cycle of Jupiter and Saturn, which is called Barahaspati Vars for Jovian years. Then we have Saptarshi Samvatsar, which is described in 2 ways. One version tells that it is of 2700 Divya Vars. Another version tells that it is 3030 years Manush Vars. So here Divya Vars means solar year only, and Manush Vars means 12 revolutions of moon, which are in about 327 days. If you calculate, then both will tally. Means 2700 solar years will be equal to 3030 Manush years, human years, which is 12 revolutions of moon, not the lunar year. So here we understand that one meaning of Divyavars is solar year only, and it starts with the Uttarayan, means around 21st December. Then next year, Samvatsar is Bhaраспатya Samvatsar, which I have stated earlier that it has 60-year cycle. But there are two types of cycles. One is in South India, which is Pitama system. We take solar year as the Jovian year. In North India, Surya Siddhant, later Surya Siddhant method, takes actual time of Jupiter in a Rashi, which is average time is 361 days, about 4 hours. So in northern system, which is called Surya Siddhant system, there are 86 jovial years in 85 solar years. So when both cycles combine, it will be a yuga of 5100 years, which was described in Adbhut Sagar by Ballal Sen in about 1000 AD. So he had referred to Vishnu Dharmottar Puran. There are references that when at the time of Ram Avatar and Matsya Avatar, in both systems, it was Prabhavars. So we start the Jovian cycle with Prabhav years. That is the reason given there. So that way I calculated that both cycles were jointly coming, means starting in 9533 BC for Matsya Avatar and 4433 BC for Ram Avatar. So in those years they tally. Then there is cycle of Dhruvars, which is 3 times the Saptarshi year. That also has reference because it started with the death of King Dhruv, which was a grandson of Swayambhu Manu. Dhruvars, or later on it was called Kronchvars. When Kartikeya attacked Kronchdeep, then it was called Kronchvars. So that is 8100 solar years. Then we come to our common yugas, Kali, Satyug, Treta, Dwapar and Kali. We take it 12,000 Divyavars. Generally, Divyavars we take as 360 years. But for historical context, it is 12,000 solar years only. And in many ways, it is described in Puranas that 12,000 solar years only constituted Yuga. In Surya Siddhant astronomy book, we take for calculation purpose 12,000 Divyavars means 12,000 into 360. But there also Brahmagupta and Bhaskaracharya both have given correction cycle that is called Bij correction in cycle of 12,000 years only. And if we take that formula, there will be 2 types of cycles. In one cycle, there will be negative correction. Another cycle, there will be positive correction. So one part will start from Satyug, Treta, Dwapar, Kali Yuga, means 4800, 3600, 2400, and 1200. That is Avasarpini. Second part will start in reverse way from Kali Yuga, Dwapar, Treta, and Satyug. So 12,000 and 12,000, 24,000 years will be the called Brahmabdasya Dinatraya. It is written in 3 Puranas that it is currently 3rd day of Brahmabda. One Brahmabda is 24,000 years, and its first part is Avasarpini, starting with Satyug, Treta, Dwapar, and Kali, 12,000 years. Then in reverse way, another 12,000 years, that is Utsarpini. That way, if we calculate, then our major landmark, I will slightly differ with Acharji, once all the calendars, Panchangas are made with reference to the start of Kali Yuga era in 3102 BC, 17th February, and all the textbooks of Kerala have given their starting date and completion date in terms of day count from that day only. So whether it is mathematically true or not, we are counting days from that day only. So if we start from that day, means end of Dwapar on that day, then the Brahmabd count starts from 61,902 BC. Then it is written that in Satyug there was no civilization. From Treta, mining and agriculture started. It is written in three Varaha Puran, Brahmand Puran and Vayu Puran. It is well written that in Satyug there was no civilization. From Treta, that is 57,000 BC, mining and agriculture started regularly. There are mines of that era found in various parts of the world. And it is surprising, even now, locating a mine of copper or gold is a trial and error method. There is no definite method even in modern era that we can locate all mines on Earth's surface. How they could do it in ancient times, it is still a surprise for me. And there must have been advanced civilization at some time. And we cannot attribute everything to aliens from other planets. So that is different thing. So Swayambhu Manu period, it is described in Matsya Puran, Brahmand Puran and Bhavishya Puran, that from Swayambhu Manu to start of Kali Yuga in 3102 BC, there was a gap of 26,000 years. That is the precession cycle approximately. At present value is about 25,800 years or so. So in Puranas, it has been taken as 26,000 years. Matsya Puran tells that from Swayambhu Manu to Vaivasvat Manu, there was a period of 16,000 years approximately, and 43 yugas, means each yuga is of 360 years. Then from Vaivasvat Manu to that 3102 BC, there were 28 yugas. But if you calculate from this yuga calculation, Vaivasvat Manu, from Vaivasvat Manu, Satyug, Treta and Dwapar, they make up 10,800 years till 3102 BC. It will contain 30 yugas of 360 years. So Kumar Lal Jain explained that 2 yugas were having glacial flood era, so they were not counted. So countable yugas are 28 only. That is written in Matsya Puran. So Vaivasvat Manu period started from 31,902 BC. And after Vaivasvat Yam, it is written in Brahmand Puran and Brahma Puran that there was glacial flood. And after that, civilization restarted by Rishabdev, and then Ikshvaku started Surjvans. From Ikshvaku, there is regular chronology or rather list in the Puranas. So there was a correction in Surya Siddhant also. It is written that due to glacial floods, Jal Pralaya, there was error in calculation. Now you can understand why there should be error. Because when there is glacial flood, there will be bigger load on the equator and Earth rotation will slow down. That is why I take very old calculations by NASA software with some reservation that there may be more errors than what we expect, despite 10 types of correction in delta T they call. So for very ancient periods, it is not very accurate. That is my opinion. However, for Mahabharat period, it is accurate, not very erroneous. And there is another error that Grahan cycle, eclipse cycle repeats in 18 years. So what we find for one time, that will reoccur after 18 years, 36 years, or even the same period backwards also. So it is for exact date calculation, it is useful, but not for determining long eras. So we can tell about these things directly. So Saptarshi period started when Achar tells 3067 BC, Laukic era started in Kashmir, and that was end of one Saptarshi cycle. Going backwards, Dhruva period is about 26,000 BC. Then Kashyap period is 17,500 BC. We call Shanti Path Aditir Jatam Aditir Janitvam. Aditi is the lord of Punarvasu Nakshatra. And in that period, Punarvasu Nakshatra started the year. That was about 17,500 BC when sun crossed equator when it was in Punarvasu Nakshatra. So that is confirmed. And it is also confirmed that from Kashyap to Vaivasvat Manu, there was 10 yugas, means 3,600 years. Both ways that calculation tallies. Then Kartikeya period is accurately given that Abhijit had fallen, means North Pole was deviating from Abhijit direction, and that was in about 16,000 BC. About 200 years after that, when sun entered in Dhanishta Nakshatra, then year started, which is described in Vedang Jyotish. So that was in about 15,800 BC. Slightly before that, it was about 1,000 years before Kartikeya was period of Prithu, who did systematic mining all over the world. That is written in many Puranas. So these are the major landmarks. And another thing is that there was another long time calendar followed all over the world, 5,100 years, which I was telling. That was Mayan calendar. In India, we started Kali Yuga from 3,102 BC. But Pitama cycle of jovial year cycle in Pitama Siddhant that started 12 years earlier. That is 3,114 BC. And in Kali Yuga, it was 13th year as per South Indian cycle. So Mayan calendar started in 3,114 BC, and it was meant for 5,100 years, and it was to end in 2012 AD at the start of Uttarayan, means 22nd December it was to end. That didn't mean that world will end. That was just end of one cycle of calendar, and thereafter next cycle would have started. That is the meaning. So the periods are given that Prithu or Chakshus Manu period, means about 3,000 years before Vaivasvat Manu, Chakshus Manantar started. That was period of Kartikeya, Vaman, Bali, etc. Then a short note, and after Ikshvaku, their periods are given. That Parshuram period is accurately given. After that, Kulam Sambat started in Kerala, and that is still continuing in Kerala. And this Bahu Megasthenes also has written about 154 generations of Indian kings that I have described in detail, that I will not tell here now. Another thing is that every person's period is given in block of 360 years. That in such and such period, this person happened. So 2,400. So about Rigveda period, there is no definite date. Our Puranas tell that all the 28 Vyases, starting from Swayambhu Manu to Badrayan Vyas at the time of Mahabharata, they compiled the Vedas in their own way. And at present, we are having the compilation by Ved Vyas only, means Krishna Devapan Vyas at the time of Mahabharata war. Earlier, there was, up to the time of Kashyap, there was only one Veda. At the time of Vaman, whose guru was Bharadwaj, Vedas were divided into four parts, Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva. That is given in Mundakopanishad, first part only, first 5 verses. So, present scheme of Vedas, not the present Sangitas, that started in around 17,000 BC. This is the scriptural evidence. I have not confirmed it by astronomical calculation, but this is the scriptural. Thank you.
Thank you, Arunji. This is wonderful. So much information. All it goes to say that the confusion is very well justified because the different people are writing some of these things, and their writing it depends on their perspective, and also it depends on some of the traditions that people follow. I mean, whether this is about the information or about their mindset or the kingdom or the situation, it seems, I think, appropriate to accept that there are different way to calculate these. One of the things, I mean, from my perspective, I'm very much interested in philosophical aspect of some of these things, and you mentioned about yugas. Now, in Bhagavad Gita, it says Sambhavami Yuge Yuge, which sometimes literally might mean like, well, when there is a yuga, then there will be a incarnation. Well, so far we know from various sources and a lot of this that you told, there are only 10 avatars so far, what we consider the 10 avatars. If we consider that to be yuga yuga, then that will be a very limited description of that. So I think what you are saying is there have been so many sources throughout the length and breadth of India, and perhaps maybe greater India at one time. And everybody has their own perspective in terms of either text or in terms of the time, or you're talking about the flood. But one of the things that will be interesting, and I want to go back to Nilesh, is that astronomical things, if they are mentioned, can be, Narahari Acharji has done the same thing as Nilesh has done. You can go back. But this one caveat that I thought about after listening to Arun Kumarji, that we talk about, the whole universe started with Brahma's one day and one night. Is that all that counts? And Brahmaji has 100 days to live, whatever. So if that were the time of universe, then we are talking about, at least from modern physics point of view, 13 billion years or so, at least one cycle of universe. And then Brahmaji's, there's only one day and one night, and then he has 100. So these astronomical, because the whole thing apparently was created according to that, let's say, Big Bang theory or whatever we want to use it for. The whole stars were created, so they can be created and recreated. And so whatever you are seeing is maybe true only for now, may not be true for all the time. And if the information is there for very, very long time, then it may be more confusing than what Arun Kumarji just said. Nileshji, what do you think of that?
Namaskar. It was wonderful listening to everyone. And Arun Kumarji, I mean, I have read many of his posts, and just a summary. What a wonderful summary! And to digest will take some time, and actually to use them meaningfully will even take many years. I mean, decades of work. What a great source of knowledge. So just a quick summary to everything I heard. I mean, directionally, at least everyone is comfortable going beyond that 3,000, 5,000 BC as a time for Indian civilization and beyond. And some people may want to restrict it. But quickly to a specific question that you asked, if this universe has been formed and more formed multiple times, how do we relate to, say, astronomy phenomenon? That's a great question. For example, let's look at just briefly, I'll go with what I'm most familiar with, say the Mahabharata and Ramayana. The way astronomy is described, or the astronomy references made in Mahabharata and Ramayana, so all the nakshatra system that is referred to, for example, if you go back, if one goes back in time, say beyond 100,000, and specifically more than, say, 150,000 years, so 150,000 years in the past, if you go and beyond, then the current nakshatra system that we are using, or the current meaning, the way we use it in our times, or the way it is described in the Mahabharata, or the way it is described in the Ramayana, simply would not exist. Some of the stars move so far away, for example, Swati and Rohini, and I'll not go into the details, that they cannot be nakshatra. And of course, Arun Kumarji referred to the position of Brahma Rashi or Abhijit or Vega becoming a pole star, but that's a periodic that will come back and forth. But Rohini and Swati are wonderful. They will just move away. So my point is that kind of gives us 150,000 years ago as a upper limit for a use of the modern astronomy or the Indian astronomy that we have. So that puts the upper limit.
Okay. But your Nilesh, your calculation from my conversation, not that you mentioned today, is that you put age of Vedas at least 22,000 years.
Yeah, before 22,000. Yeah. So quickly, I'll come to that, because I don't know if anyone on the panel had a objection to thinking of a Veda before, say, I don't know, say 10,000. So I'll use that 10,000 as a number. Certainly, Arun Kumarji did not. I mean, he was referring to 31,000 BC of Vaivasvata, Manu, and so on. The way I arrived at the dating for Rigveda is simply this. In Rigveda, we have a description to Saraswati. For example, it is described as Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati. One of the oldest mandalas based on the work of Srikantalagiriji. And I understand some people may not agree with Srikantalagiriji's relative chronology, and I don't consider that sacrosanct as well. I consider that is the best as of now. And if someone can falsify that, that's great. I mean, I'm not attached to my own claims. Why would I be attached to Srikantalagiriji's relative chronology? But the point is, Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati. This comes in 63742, the oldest mandalas, or Giribhya Asamudra. So Giribhya Asamudras is the easy reference to explain. What it is saying is that is the biggest river that is flowing from high mountains all the way to the ocean. And we have 3 wonderful papers, and actually there are 35 papers that they're sitting here, but 3 papers of Khonde, 2014, 2016, 2017. And what he showed is very important. He showed that there was indeed a great river going through where we think the Saraswati region is, starting with the mountains, going all the way to the ocean in India. But then he also shows with his research, geophysics, geochemistry research, that there was no such a grand river flowing from all the way to the from the mountains to the ocean in the last 10,000 years, which means the river, that great river existed going all the way to the ocean, existed before 10,000 years ago. And that if you start looking at other references, and I'll quickly give you example what I mean by other references. Mary Courty 1986, Henry Frankfurt 1992, Clift 2012, 2017, Singh from IIT, then Dave, and many others. All of their work basically supports this, because what it shows that Yamuna separated from Saraswati sometime between 50,000 years to 40,000 years ago, and Satluj separated from Saraswati in 13,000 BCE. So after that, Saraswati became smaller and smaller and eventually disappeared sometime after 4,500 BCE. And people put different dates.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. I think that is helpful to put things in context where we can try to use some of this information. It's not that easy to use a state to just ordinary people as to what it is. I mean, so it really is complicated and complex, and we have to find some way to communicate that complexity is there, but then in general, whatever we are saying is also true. So I want to go back to Narahari ji, that you got basically propelled yourself into this and brought some astronomical calculations, which I think was very big relief to people like me, that at least there is somebody who is doing this calculation based on some reference point. But what do you think of its meaning now? Now that you have not only have worked for so long, and you got, you said you got hooked into this when we started working on Mahabharata. And Mahabharata is, anybody can get hooked. It's not because of the chronology. It's because of the amount of information that comes, the various aspects of life that shows up. We really, we have nothing but to get hooked onto it, because everything almost you can get to see it. But what do you think of the meaning now that, this maybe the chronology is very complex and it could mean different things in different contexts, like Arunji is saying, and also Nilesh is saying. So what do you think of now that the fact that you did mention something and that did trigger a lot of work and a lot of thinking? But what do you think now should be the next step, and what do you stand in that?
Thank you, Balramji, and thanks to Arun Kumarji for bringing out all the details from the Puranas. We have to think about 2 different things here. One is cosmic time, which relates to the creation of the universe and the destruction of the universe. It's a very, very long time. The other one is the local time, in the sense that the time range we are living with. This is amenable to astronomical calculations regarding the position of the stars and planets and so on, but not that cosmic time, because that's beyond this. We can only say, oh, this could have happened, that could have happened, but nothing particular. Now, when it comes to Mahabharata, the dates that are obtained are by specific references to astrological events, in the sense that if Shani is here near Rohini, it causes something, that kind of a thing. And so one can infer from that within the reasonable short time, where was Shani at Rohini? For example, in Udyoga Parva, it says, Prajapatyam hi nakshatram. That is the Prajapati nakshatra is Rohini. Rohini is afflicted by Shani. And Varaha Mihra says, for any nakshatra to be afflicted by Shani, it has to satisfy certain conditions. And let me see what it says here. Had it somewhere. For nakshatra to be afflicted, Ravi Sutta Bhogamagatam, Kshitisuta Bhedana Vakradushitam, Grahanagatam, Atha Ulkyohatam Nityam, Ushakara Piditantra. So Ravi and Ravi Sutta is Ravi's son, Ravi Sutta is Saturn. For them to afflict a nakshatra, they have to be Bhogamagatam, they have to be near that nakshatra. Kshitisuta is Mars. In order for the nakshatra to be afflicted by Mars, it should be Bhedana. It's called piercing. And then Vakradushitam. The motion of Angaraka should be retro near that nakshatra. Or in that nakshatra, it could be Grahanagatam or Ulkyahatam. It can be either an eclipse or a meteorite. So these are the conditions under which a nakshatra can be said to be afflicted. For example, in the Udyoga Parva, when it says, Prajapatyami nakshatram, Shanaishraha pidayati. Here, Saturn is afflicting Rohini nakshatra. That means Saturn must be near Rohini. No other possibilities are there. And so we can use that thing to find out where can Rohini be. So Saturn is a period of about 29.5 years. And so if Saturn is near Rohini now, it will be here again 25.9 years later and so on. So one can look at in a short period range, say for example, from about 4005 BC to say current time, where how many times can Rohini be near, how many times can Saturn be near Rohini? That fixes essentially the year in which Mahabharata war could have taken place. And then if you look at the other one, because Karuna mentions the Vakra motion of Angaraka, and then it has to be near Jyeshtha Nakshatra. So in those years, if you see how many times can Angaraka be near Vakra near Rohini or near Jyeshtha Nakshatra, then it turns out that it reduces that number of years. And from that, then you can go to look at the calculation of the eclipses, and that actually brings down the year in the range about 4,500 to current year to only 2 years, 2,183 BC and 3,067 BC. All the 4 astronomical events mentioned in Udyoga Parva happen in these 2 years. But those themselves are not enough to decide which one of them should be the year in which the war could have taken place. For that, we look at the textual evidence from Mahabharata itself. And some people interpret the shloka from Krishna to Karna. Saptamat chapi divasad amavasya bhavishyati. There is going to be an amavasya from 7 days from now. Let the sangramam yujyatam tatra tamahu shakra devatam. Let the war, some people interpret it as let the war begin on that amavasya. The interpretation is let the war rituals begin on that day. And so this, considering the sequence of events, and we can show that the war could not have begun on an amavasya. And then because the 14th day of the war, anyway, it goes into too much details, but it turns out that 3067 turns out to be the year. So we have to look at the long duration of the cosmic time, and we cannot hope to calculate that in any way. We can only make approximations. And so the calculations that we're using the astronomical software are only good for short range of period. And that's my.
That makes perfect sense again to say that things are very complicated, and especially a reason that claims to not only one universe time but multiple and all universal time, and that just adds that. But I think your comments about astrological and astronomical, I think is very important. So astrologically, I don't know if that's what you really meant. You said that there were some astrological references, and astrological, sometimes people tell certain things to do at certain times in my life, for example. So in my own life cycle, these planetary movements go several times, and sometimes if they're referring to that is a very different life cycle that like you're talking about. And but if we confuse that to my life, if people started talking about how much is the sunny's life, how much is the Mars, and then somebody somewhere, let's say 5,000 years from now, had my astrological chart reading and said Balram Singh must have lived for whatever 50,000 years or something like that, which is probably not very relevant at that time. Maybe actually misunderstanding, because sometimes people think Rama lived for 80,000 years or something like that, I've heard, and that just looks like preposterous. So while you think about that, I want to go to Kalyanramanji, because he's the one who really brought this historical, archaeological information, and because that's important to make sense, and make sense not only just for us, but also in the context of us and when others are referring. And there is a dominating forces, at least for last 2,000 years or so, who have systematically tried to undermine, and they continue today intellectually to undermine some of the things that are complex, yet not exactly the way they are defined by the Western world, maybe simplified. And they maybe don't need to be simplified. I mean, the fact that there are a lot of things in chemistry, for example, very complex, and we just accept that that's very complex, and then this is what we know. There is no reason to have to explain everything to be acceptable. That's just not the nature of the thing. So what do you think of now from your perspective, have done so much work and with so much dedication and a mission, to make sense to people? Does it, this whole complexity, how do we, you think, derive back to some sensible thing historically and culturally and traditionally?
Balramji, you brought out a very beautiful point. See, we have very multiple levels of memories. One level could be a faith-based system or from Pramana of the Vedas, which are also enshrined in a number of Vedic texts. We believe that, that's it. When my grandmother tells me that Saraswati joined the Ganga and Yamuna in Prayag, I believe her. The thing is, we have not scientifically been able to prove how did this happen. Was it part of Yamuna carrying the Saraswati waters, joining at Prayag because of the plate tectonic events related to the cosmic dance of the Himalayas? We have metaphors. We have Kailasanatha sitting on top of the Kailasa Parvatam, and out of his jata emerges these great rivers. And we venerate him with continuous oblations of water, dripping of water. So he is a water giver. The Himalayas are water giver. So these metaphors have got to be interpreted. We can do it in our own way. One possibility is that we have to look at it in civilizational terms. How do you define civilization and distinguish it from culture? Rajaji defined culture very beautifully. Culture is an automatic pattern of good behavior. So Rama might not have been civilized in terms of wearing beautiful kurtas and pajamas and so on, but he was a very cultured person. So Ravana was a very cultured person. He was a devotee of Kailasanatha. So these metaphors have got to be understood in their context. Now I will refer to one particular word which Arun Upadhyaya, Arun Kumar mentioned about the date of the Kali Yuga, which has been enshrined in our tradition. How can we deny the tradition? For thousands of years, in hundreds of inscriptions, Kali Yuga is referred to as the date of reckoning of an event, It's recorded in history. We depend on epigraphy as a source of history. So when we are reconstructing a proto-history and bringing it to the area of domain of history, where we can understand the activities of the people, say of the Vedic people or the Mahabharata people, and explain them, we have got to use these civilizational markers. So one of the civilizational markers is a word called Kali. Kali is a word that occurs in the Atharva Veda and Shatapada Brahmana, and is also referred to as one of the yugas in the Vedic text. So with the tradition linked to this Kali, which is a dice game that is the centerpiece of the entire Mahabharata, the dice game that determines the fate of people, Daivyam, the divine intervention, the providence that happens. So that's how the explanation takes place in terms of the astrological events that Narahari was mentioning. So we have got to make a very clear distinction between the astrological markers and the astronomical markers. So Narahari made a very beautiful commentary on the word graha. It has been accepted in our etymological framework, chronological framework of the word graha. It refers to both a planet and a comet. So if you use the word graha as a comet in a particular context, we get a different meaning of the text. So there could be different interpretations of the same text and arrive at different dates. And question saying, oh, they are astrological, they are not reliable, they are old wives' tales. No way. Our ancestors were remarkable people. They saw the Pramana of the Vedas. They expressed themselves so beautifully. So they were quest for knowledge. That is the meaning of the word Veda, with knowledge. So that knowledge acquisition, knowledge inquiry resulted in the determination of the dates to which they belong. So if the yuga is mentioned in the Vedic context, we have got to be respectful of the tradition in determining what date could be referred to. So I think the work done by Arun Kumar Upadhyaya, Nilesh, Narahari, Achar are very important components in resolving this major enigma of our civilizational story. So I am announcing a civilizational epigraphy as a new discipline in artificial intelligence, like the way Google did a driverless car. Let us go through all these pictures, epigraphs, hieroglyphs of the Indo script. Let us try to understand them and to relate the words to the spoken tongue, the lingua franca of the civilization. I call it Meluha, the Mlecha. Mlecha is a pronunciation, mispronunciations of words that explains why in our Indian languages we have same core word getting different pronunciations. One call it Tatan, one call it Tatar, and so on and so forth. And Germans call it Tuisto, Tuisko, Taksha, Tachan, and so on. So this resource of enormous information available in millions of words of our 25 plus languages will be a resource which you can use to resolve the differences of opinion that come up by using only one discipline. So we should have a multidisciplinary approach to studying the civilizational epigraphy and create an artificial intelligence framework. I recommend this artificial intelligence framework also for another reason. The Indo script, for instance, employs the semantics of the words, red rebus, similar sounding words, and introduces a semantic layer over the data encryption method. So it can be a very strong method for improving the data encryption standards, which can contribute to artificial intelligence, just together with machine learning. In fact, Google has now started a culture project called the Google Fabricus, with which the Sydney University in Australia is associated. We can have a larger project of this kind with the semantics of the Indo script for our civilizational epigraphy. That's my submission. Namaskar ji.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. I think this idea of artificial intelligence, I think, will be maybe appreciated very highly with by Arun Kumar ji, because he has so much information. Arun Kumar ji can be very important part of this, and as are others, to how to stack it. You know, I think I mean, we are dealing with this not only our civilization, but we are also dealing. I'm talking about Vedic civilization, but also we are talking about Western civilization, which has a very dominant discourse framework, and in which they put everything. So a civilization that talks about billions and billions of years and the origin, like cosmologically talking about that, very complex, and then simply talking about, these tithis and nakshatras changing every day, and we operate according to them. Also, sometimes the names are the same, and then it becomes, you do a Google, somebody who only works on Google today, they will find a problem. So what I want to come to you is, what do you think of Kalyanramanji's idea, and particularly in the context of the rest of the world, that how they look at it? And then from your perspective, if you have paid attention to this, is that in all these texts, how the rest of the world was referred to in all these texts? And then only I think we may be able to then refer that this is what they have referred, and today we can refer to that and perhaps communicate to them at that level. When I talk to a chemist, I talk in chemistry. When I talk to my folks in my village, I talk to them in my Audhi language, and talk about all the whatever that is needed. They don't even ever think that I'm a professor. Sometimes they get confused. There was one guy in my village once, he was asking me, "What do you do?" I was talking to him in he just like the people used to come and see me when I go from here. And he said, "What?" Ultimately, he asked me like 2-3 visits after I came to United States. He asked me, "What do you do there?" And I said, "Oh, I teach there." He said, "Really?" He said, so then he says, "Do they understand our language?" Because he never thought that I speak anything in any other language than the one I was talking to him. He said, "Do they really understand this language?" I said, "No, I do speak another language." So anyway, what I'm trying to say with that is that communication is the key, and stacking of information, what I think Kalyanraman is beautifully saying, that maybe using artificial intelligence. So when, we can almost ask like, Ayurveda question, what Vata, Pitta, Kapha you are, and then that's where you need to go to. So if your label is this is what you understand. Now this is the stake is important for you. What do you think of that? Arun Kumarji, you unmute yourself and please make comments. It's not unmuted yet.
Yeah, he has to ask to unmute.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
I think there is no question for me. And
No, this question was, did you not hear what I said? The information that you have, you talked about so many ways, Puranas, and talking about the whole cosmology, talking about what you were talking about, different kind of manus. And so this level of information needs to be stacked so that people can access to the level that they might be interested, or that might be useful for them. That's what I'm asking.
oh, I have written this stacking what you are telling from 57,000 BC. I have compiled the chart. There may be some correction, but it gives a useful idea of the relative chronology, you can say. And it deals about the other countries of the world also. Like North America was called Crunch Dweep. Even South America, Uruguay has been mentioned in earlier text, that from Bali's place, first step of Waman was east part of Indonesia. Next step was in Uruguay. That way it has been mentioned. So these places have been mentioned. And Crunch Dweep, North America was called Crunch Dweep because North America and Rockies Mountain both are in the shape of flying bird on the map. But that is also written in Mahabharata, that they are shaped like a crunch bird.
Fantastic. Great.
Africa also has been mentioned. Even Antarctica has been mentioned, and Antarctica has been mentioned by Aryabhat also, Aryabhat and Lull. So all the zones are mentioned in two ways. That is another subject. I will send you the slides of my analysis. We were dividing in 8 zones for mapping purpose. So India zone was called Bharatvarsh map, means up to North Pole, and there are other 4 quadrants in the South Pole, 4 quadrants in the North Pole. Indian quadrant was divided into 7 locas from equator to North Pole, and other quadrants, 3 in North and 4 in South, were called Tal or Patal, 7 Patals. 7 Patals are not in the space, they are only on Earth's surface, but 7 locas are in space also, on Earth also. That is the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kalyanraman wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing, Balramji. We have a fantastic resource created by University of Chicago called the Schwarzberg Atlas. A group of scholars, including our great late Q. Vajpayee, constructed this atlas. It's magnificent. They try to pull out the names of the people of different regions and mark them in this atlas, primarily related to South Asia. So the atlas is a very solid source of material that is available to us to determine the civilizational framework within which the life activities are taking place. So the Schwarzberg Atlas, before it disappears by the end of December, as accessible through Flash, must be made available to all the children to take a look at what this Bharatavarsha is, what these Bharatam Janam are, mentioned in the Rigveda 3.53.12 by Vishwamitra. So who are these Bharatam Janam? That is venerating, and this is my mantra will protect these people of Bharatam Janam. So this Bharatavarsha has to give us our identity, and we have to resolve this major issue of identity problem that we have faced by a lot of distortions that have occurred from Eurocentric, racist perspectives. We have got to change that. Namaskar.
Thank you. So I want to go back to Nilesh, and I want to give a little bit of introduction. I know you all kind of familiar with what I've done, a little bit of work that I have done. My interest is really in the Yuga, and I try to understand the philosophical meaning of it. But I have actually, Kalyanraman, last time you came to here, I was at UMass, and I have taken retirement from there. And I have set up an institute of my own. It's called Institute of Advanced Sciences, where we do some aspect of research. And I'm just putting my background changing so that you know where I am coming from. And it has been wonderful to have all this knowledge and interaction, particularly for me, because I was not familiar at all with any of this. And I have my own understanding and question my own interest now that I study. But I want to go back to Nilesh, because the thing that you're talking about, University of Chicago, Nilesh, I think Nilesh has been a faculty at our institute now. And it has, I will talk to maybe Kalyanraman, sometimes I'll give you a call and talk to you about, what the various things we are trying to do. One of them we are trying to do is the INETS, as it is referred as its acronym, Institute of Advanced Sciences, INETS World Campus. We are developing an INETS World Campus, and in which we have a vision that hopefully will match with some of the practices of Vedic times for education. And so in that context, I want to ask this question to Nilesh, that not only to perhaps find a way to get that information and maybe immortalize that in digital world so that we have it for like what Kalyanraman is saying. But I think more importantly, Nilesh is the next step thing, what we need to do in terms of communication, not only, whatever will be available is stacking and the information that Arun is saying, but how do you see this in terms of being communicated effectively and with love and care? It's okay. People have done some mischievous things, but that we need to be better at that. And we need to, and we unfortunately or unfortunately, we live in the Western world, and we have access to some of these people. And I have, Kalyanraman made many people very the personal friends, even though I know most people scholarly, either whether in science or non-science. But when I have gone down to that level where you meet people, they are in awe when they understand that this is what they have misunderstood. They are in awe. So I think there is an opportunity, and Corona is really providing this to a lot better, because the last as people say, the fat lady has not sung as yet about the Corona. So that means the things are still in the pipeline, whether this is related to vaccine or the treatment. And India and Ayurveda is becoming very, very important. I know some of the stuff that I'm myself involved. So what I'm trying to say that there is a very nice opportunity of communicating this complexity in such a way that people can at least begin to climb that, those steps to eventually realize, not only because it is true and it is important and it is useful, but given the population genetics information that the rest of the world accepts, Kalyanramanji, that 70,000 years ago, everybody, almost virtually everybody in this world has come out of Indian subcontinent. And so that there is no, and this is not Indians claiming, this is the rest of the world is claiming. So they are in some sense children of ours, so to speak, our ancestors. They just went out, just like I have come to United States. Someday I may be just considered, and my culture, my language, my food and all that stuff. Oh, this is in America, but actually, really, I did come from India. Maybe people will not be able to keep it someday, or maybe my children will not be kul premi enough to keep it. They may be, I don't want to call them kuldrohi, but they may be, kul bismriti. They may not understand this someday. And, but that may, if they are kul premi, I'm sure they will keep it. So I think sometimes when we remind them, when I see the Western world people, like I said, scientists, great scientists, actually well accomplished people, when they see it, they really recognize it. I think there is this string, this element, this strain in them that they want it because that's truth. And so anyway, with this very long prologue, I'm giving you this question, Nileshji, and that may be actually the end of our conversation. But please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand your question, you said, what is the effective way to take this kind of research, if we can use the phrase dumb down, or or make it appropriate for each level? How do we do it? I'll quickly mention my evolution in this area, and that actually answers that question as I see it. I started with, of course, learning and reading from everything that was existing and comprehending it. So it starts with that tapasya. Then my journey started with writing a book. So it was through the books. Then I came to blogs, and then I came to giving a public lecture. So that lecture started 2016. But as you said, we have wonderful access to technology, improving technology. So since then, since 2016, beyond these three modes of communication, I have taken to social media, like two specific areas, the Twitter and Facebook. And I did not want to go to the either. But there is one group called Bharat Rakshak Forum, and some of you may be aware of it. But many people there, there are like 8,000 plus folks there. And many requested me, pleaded me, say, you must come to Facebook and you must come to Twitter. And that's how finally I yielded and I came to Facebook and Twitter. So that's one. Now, going beyond that, what I am doing is I'm mentoring a few students, and I'll just mention, I shouldn't say student, I'm mentoring few researchers, and I'll mention somebody's work. But going beyond, like people's attention span is getting less and less with this social media. And so I'm working with the movie makers, I'm working with the documentary makers, I'm working with novelists. So people who want to write novels based on the Indian narration, but in their novel, they can embed some of the new data, new wonderful researches that are coming out. And actually, I would say right now there are close to 10 individuals who are working on their projects, and they're embedding the information, the research that I have brought to the shore. And so a couple other points quickly wanted to mention. The multidisciplinary evidence that's exactly what I work on. Like, you name a discipline, and if it's a scientific discipline and a data exists, I have done something in it, or at least I try to understand and try to relate to it. Recently, I did one Sugriva's Atlas, and Arun Kumarji, I think, mentioned, like some other text mentions Antarctica and whatnot, and Arya Bhatia mentions it. Absolutely, he does. And Sugriva defines the geography of his time, 14,000 years ago, for starting with India all the way to South America in the east direction, all the way to Antarctica in the south direction, all the way to Arctic Sea in the north direction, and all the way to Alps in the west direction. So yes, I mean, we can start making the connection to the rest of the world. And quickly, last point on the astronomy. It is true that we don't have an independent, or we did not have an independent standard to see how far back we can take the algorithms of modern astronomy. What I would like to assert, and this is open for people to critique it, is that my dating of the Mahabharata in 5561 BC, or for the Ramayana in 12,209 BC, has actually shown that the Ramayana references and Mahabharata references can be used as the calibration standards, golden standards, to validate the algorithms of modern astronomy. So I will end on that note.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Great learning for me. I think the only maybe 1 or 2 points I would like to mention. One is, like I just said, we are offering Nilesh Oak, and he's working on it. That will be in INET's World Campus. We will have Nilesh Oak School of Archaeoastronomy as an example, which would mean that it's very important to understand that it is his independent thought. It is his, like he's mentioning, so much work that is already going on, and a lot of people are already interested in that. So if we present that in such a way, Nilesh says maybe and you need to talk further about it, maybe you have already thought about it, is that, and it's important for all of us to think, is that unless we make it relevant to people's lives, it either does not get counted or many times countered. So I think it's very important to, and whatever Kalyanramanji, I think about my work now, I'm working on Ayurveda as an example. I mean, some aspect of Ayurveda, which is more biochemical and the thing, because that's what people will be able to appreciate from my group. But also its relevance, Ayurveda is not just chemicals and not just herbals. It is really a lifestyle. And this lifestyle comes from this knowledge that the whole cosmos, we belong to this whole cosmos. And we need to have that understanding, and that kind of a lifestyle in which, for example, we have the dates. We are talking about the dates, or the days. I have spoken about this before. All these 7 days are not mentioned in Mahabharata or in Ramayana. The way they have war, they called war, the Buddhawar, war, Vasar, I think, but they don't have this Somwar, Mangalwar, Buddhawar, Brihaspatiwar. This is unnatural. Our things are tithis, which is natural. That's the first way to connect. We connect with sun, we connect with the moon, and the moon is the one who changes, so it's much easier to connect with rather than solar, which takes a long time to change. So I think some of these practical things are in Ayurveda as an example. Ayurvedic way of food or living and sleeping and seasons and things like that. So I think if we can make it relevant, something like that, and then the same way about history, the things have happened, but we need to learn from that rather than just accuse each other again, going back to the historical. So then I think people kind of find it more use. I hope that this discussion has made some baby steps in that direction. And I hope that we will continue to engage each other. I think in your great work that you're doing, I hope that I will get connected with you all to give me some ideas about the INET's World Campus. And I hope that people like Nilesh do succeed in moving this forward to communicate these great ideas from the place that we are very fortunate to have our birth. And thank you all very much. And Babes is obviously very grateful for your time and contributions throughout your work that you have done, but particularly for this panel discussion. Thank you so much. Namaskaram.
धन्यवाद.
Thank you. Namaskar.
जीवेम शरद शतम. Live 100 years. धन्यवाद.
Dhanyawad.